When the Roman legions crushed the army of Queen Zenobia outside Antioch in 272 CE, her generals expected execution. Instead, they watched their queen endure something far more calculated. Rome had perfected the art of breaking rulers without killing them, transforming defiant monarchs into living monuments to imperial power. For women who wore crowns, defeat meant facing a brutality designed not merely to punish, but to erase dignity itself. Roman law denied queens legal protection. Under Roman law, war captives existed in a category that stripped them of every protection afforded to citizens. The principle known as jus gentium, or the law of nations, held that military defeat transformed free people into property. Once a city fell or an army surrendered, its inhabitants became legally enslaved regardless of their former status. A queen commanded no more legal standing than the lowest soldier in her defeated army. This legal framework created a terrifying reality. Roman citizens possessed rights that shielded them from certain punishments. To flog a Roman citizen was considered scandalous. To execute one without trial sparked outrage. But foreign captives, regardless of royal blood, held no such protections. They could be mistreated, displayed, sold, or killed at the discretion of their captives. Roman law made no exceptions for gender and none for nobility. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest legal code from the 5th century BCE, established these principles with brutal clarity. Prisoners taken in war became the property of the Roman state or were distributed among soldiers. Women of royal lineage discovered that their former power meant nothing once chains replaced their crowns. Tacitus documented this legal reality when he described the treatment of defeated British royalty, noting that Roman officials showed no hesitation in violating those who had once commanded armies and administered justice. Female captives faced additional vulnerability. Roman military culture, forged through centuries of conquest, regarded captured women as spoils of war. While some elite prisoners might be housed in relative comfort pending ransom or political negotiation, most faced immediate degradation. The line between prisoner of war and slave existed only on paper. In practice, music defeat dissolved all former status, leaving captive queens vulnerable to treatment that would have been unthinkable had they possessed Roman citizenship. Royal prisoners displayed in Roman triumphs. The Roman triumph transformed military victory into public spectacle, and captive royalty served as the centerpiece of these elaborate processions. When a general received permission from the Senate to celebrate a triumph, preparations began for a display that would parade Rome's dominance through the streets for all to witness. The route stretched from the Field of Mars through the Forum and up to the Capitoline Hill, covering nearly 4 kilometers of crowded thoroughfares. These processions followed a carefully choreographed order designed to maximize psychological impact. Musicians and entertainers led the parade, followed by carts bearing paintings and models of conquered cities and distant lands. Wild animals from exotic territories were led in chains, offering Romans a glimpse of the unknown world their legions had subdued. Then came the prisoners of war, walking in shackles at the heart of the spectacle. Captured rulers marched at the front of the prisoner column, their royal garments often left intact to emphasize the magnitude of their fall. Queens who had commanded armies now shuffled in chains before crowds that jeered and celebrated their humiliation. The contrast was deliberate. By displaying monarchs in their full regalia while bound and powerless, Rome communicated a message that resonated far beyond the city walls. No kingdom stood beyond reach. No throne guaranteed safety. The triumphal procession served multiple purposes beyond celebration. It demonstrated Roman military might to potential allies and enemies alike. It satisfied the bloodlust of citizens who craved visible proof of victory. And it provided a stage for the systematic degradation of those who had dared resist Roman expansion. For female captives of royal blood, the triumph meant enduring the gaze of thousands while music stripped of all dignity. The journey typically took an entire day, with the procession moving slowly to allow spectators along the route to observe every detail. Captive queens walked this gauntlet, knowing their fate hung in the balance. Some would survive the day, others would not see sunset. The uncertainty itself served as torture, forcing the defeated to contemplate their approaching doom with every step through streets lined with celebrating Romans. Zenobia marched through Rome in gold chains. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra had carved out an empire that stretched from Egypt to Anatolia, challenging Roman authority across the east. When Emperor Aurelian finally crushed her forces in 272 CE and captured the queen as she fled toward Persia, he gained more than a military victory. He acquired the perfect symbol for his upcoming triumph: the Historia Augusta, a collection of imperial biographies written in the 4th century. Provides detailed descriptions of Zenobia's appearance in Aurelian's triumphal procession of 274 CE. The account, likely drawing on eyewitness testimony, describes a spectacle designed to overwhelm observers with its opulence and cruelty. Zenobia was adorned with jewels that caught the sunlight, transforming her into a glittering monument to Rome's power over the wealthiest kingdoms of the East. But it was the chains that drew the most attention. These were not simple iron shackles meant merely to restrain. Zenobia walked bound in heavy golden chains, so massive that guards marched beside her to help bear their weight. The choice of gold was deliberate. These chains symbolized the very wealth she had commanded, now turned into the instrument of her bondage. Her entire person had become a walking display of conquered riches. Ancient sources note that Zenobia maintained remarkable composure throughout the ordeal. Despite the weight of the golden chains and the hours of slow marching through hostile crowds, she carried herself with dignity. This very defiance may have saved her life. Aurelian, impressed perhaps by her bearing or calculating that her continued existence served his purposes better than her death, spared Zenobia the execution that awaited most captive rulers. Instead, the emperor granted her a villa near Rome, where she lived out her remaining years. Some accounts claim she married a Roman senator and became part of aristocratic society, her daughters marrying into noble families. Whether this represented mercy or a more subtle form of humiliation remains debated. Zenobia spent her final decades as a living reminder of Rome's power. Her presence in Italian society was a constant demonstration that even the mightiest queens could be reduced to Roman dependence. Boudica's daughters were publicly abused by legionaries. In 60 CE, when King Prasutagus of the Iceni died, he left a will designed to protect his kingdom and family. He bequeathed half his territory to Emperor Nero and half to his 2 daughters, hoping this compromise would preserve independence while satisfying Roman demands. The strategy failed catastrophically. Roman officials led by the imperial procurator Decianus Catuus ignored the will entirely. They seized all the lands and property of the Iceni, declaring the entire kingdom forfeit. When Queen Boudica protested this violation, she faced punishment that demonstrated how little protection royal status afforded defeated rulers. Tacitus, whose father-in-law Agricola served in Britain during this period, recorded what followed with unusual directness for ancient historians discussing such matters. Boudica was publicly subjected to corporal punishment. The flogging alone represented a profound violation. To beat a Roman citizen required legal justification and procedural safeguards. To flog a queen of an allied kingdom constituted an act of deliberate humiliation. But the Romans went further. Boudica's daughters, likely teenagers and certainly unmarried, were violated by Roman soldiers. Tacitus describes these assaults with sparse language that conveys his own horror at events that violated even Roman sensibilities about acceptable conduct. The historian notes that Boudica was flogged and her daughters violated, placing these crimes at the center of his explanation for the rebellion that followed. The abuse was not random violence, but calculated degradation designed to break the royal family and demonstrate Roman dominance over the Iceni. The public nature of these crimes multiplied their impact. This was not violence committed in secret, but humiliation performed before the Iceni people. By abusing the royal family in front of their subjects, Roman officials sent a message about the fate awaiting those who questioned imperial authority. The physical abuse and violation of Boudica and her daughters were meant to terrorize an entire population into submission. The strategy backfired spectacularly. Rather than crushing resistance, the abuse of the royal family ignited a rebellion that nearly drove Rome from Britain. Boudica raised an army that destroyed 3 Roman cities, including Londinium, massacring tens of thousands of Roman citizens and their allies. Tacitus preserves a speech he attributes to Boudica, in which she declares that she fights not as a queen seeking to preserve her kingdom, but as a woman avenging her abused body and the violated honor of her daughters. The rebellion ended in defeat at an unknown battlefield where Roman discipline and tactical positioning overcame the far larger British forces. Tacitus claims Boudica poisoned herself rather than face capture. The fate of her daughters goes unrecorded. They vanish from historical accounts after the initial violation, their stories lost to silence. Execution after triumphs ended. As triumphal processions wound through Rome toward the Capitoline Hill, captive rulers knew their journey might end at the Mamertine music prison. Known in Latin as the Tullianum, this ancient structure built into the northeastern slope of the Capitoline served as the final stop for Rome's most notable enemies, while the triumph continued to the Temple of Jupiter, where the victorious general would make offerings. Condemned prisoners were led aside to face execution. The Tullianum consisted of 2 levels. The upper chamber served as a holding cell, but the lower dungeon, accessible only through a hole in the ceiling, became the execution chamber. Here, in darkness and filth, Rome's enemies met their end. The method varied. Some were executed by suffocation. Others were left to starve. The process remained deliberately hidden from public view, occurring while crowds celebrated on the streets above. Versing, the Gallic chieftain who had unified the tribes of Gaul against Julius Caesar, exemplified this fate. After his defeat at Alesia in 52 BCE, Caesar held him in prison for 6 years before finally parading him through. Rome, in the triumph of 46 BCE, the GIC leader, once vigorous and commanding, had deteriorated during his captivity, until he appeared as a broken figure before the Roman crowds. After the procession, he was led to the Tullianum and executed. Jugurtha, king of Numidia, met a similarly brutal end following Marius's triumph in 104 BCE, according to ancient accounts. When he was lowered into the Tullianum's lower chamber, the king went mad with terror. He was left to starve to death over 6 days, his cries echoing through the stone walls while Rome celebrated above. The historian Plutarch recorded his final words, reportedly asking in delirium how cold this Roman bath is. Simon Barora, a leader of the Jewish revolt that ended with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, was displayed in Titus's triumph before being executed at the traditional site in the Forum. Josephus documented how the triumphal procession paused at the Temple of Jupiter while messengers awaited word that the execution had been carried out. Only after confirmation of the enemy leader's death did the ceremonies conclude. Not every captive ruler faced immediate execution. The decision rested with the triumphant general and increasingly under the empire with the emperor himself. Some prisoners proved more valuable alive, serving as permanent symbols of Roman victory or as bargaining tools in future negotiations. But for those marked for death, the triumph offered only a temporary reprieve before the descent into the Tullianum's darkness. The treatment of captured queens by Roman soldiers reveals how power operated in the ancient world. Legal systems that protected citizens evaporated at the boundary of conquest. Dignity afforded to nobility dissolved in defeat. These documented cases from Tacitus, Cassius Dio, and other ancient historians force us to confront the deliberate cruelty embedded in Roman conquest. The flogging of Boudica, the golden chains on Zenobia, and the executions following triumphs were not aberrations, but calculated policies designed to break resistance and display power. Take a moment to consider how the systematic humiliation of defeated royalty shaped the fears that kept Rome's enemies compliant for centuries. The stone walls of the Mamertine prison still stand in Rome, a reminder that the triumphs celebrated in ancient texts were built on human suffering. Queens who commanded armies and administered justice found themselves reduced to spectacles. Their degradation transformed into entertainment for crowds who never considered the cost of empire written in broken lives and stolen dignity.